Good afternoon, everybody. A very welcome to DTU's Ørsted lecture. The Ørsted lecture is named after DTU's founder, Hans Christian Ørsted, and it was started in 1989 as a tradition that we invite in very highly esteemed professors from abroad to give a presentation to bring us all up to speed with what is happening around the world. This lecture is kind of connected around the mission of DTU. At DTU, we want to develop science, both natural sciences and technical sciences, into the benefit of society. And I think probably today's speech speaks very much into that ambition. How do we turn data into the decisions, and decisions into real-world value? That's what it's all about. It's a great honor to introduce Pierre Pinson, Professor and Chair of Data-Centric Design Engineering at Imperial College, London. Pierre is world famous for his work on data-driven decision-making, combining forecasting and decision science to improve complex systems, particularly in the energy market and transport sector. Pierre is amongst the most recognized scholars within his field, and he has a role as editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Forecasting, one of the leading journals in that field. But truly speaking, Pierre is not only academic excellence. He's also extremely good at bringing his work into practice. This was demonstrated when Half Space, which you can see is sponsor up there, together where Pierre is chief scientist, and Molslinjen was awarded the France Edelman Award, often described as the Nobel Prize of Operations Research and Analytics. Through very clever use of data and AI, they helped transform a traditional ferry operation into a high-precision, data-driven operation, improving capacity utilization and punctuality while reducing cost and emissions. That's a striking example of how excellent research can bring excellent real-world applications. Pierre was professor at operations research at DTU Management before joining Imperial College in 2022. And we are very happy and proud that he's still adjunct professor at DTU, co-supervising PhDs and collaborating with the group. Please welcome me in saying welcome back to our DTU lecturer of today, Professor Pierre Pinson.
Tak for det, Marianne. So it's very nice to be back at DTU. It's very nice to be here for this lecture. No pressure. The last lecture was a Nobel Prize winner, right, last year. So that's why she had to say that this France Edelman Award is a bit of a Nobel Prize of something, right? It's not the same. And now that she mentioned Molslinjen also, I have to say the work is done by this team at Half Space and the people at Molslinjen. Obviously, the credit is on this team. They needed to be led to get this award, but obviously it's teamwork, right? I was told I need to talk about Molslinjen. We're in Denmark, and I think we can be proud of what Molslinjen did, and it's the first time a Danish team is bringing this kind of award to Denmark. But I want to talk about forecasting more generally, and it's really something that's close to my heart. I've been doing forecasting for 25 years, nearly. And it's something that Mariano was mentioning. It's really something that's, it's about tech. We're going to talk about a lot of tech, but it's also about a human component, and it's also making big impact on society. So you're going to see some numbers here that are actually quite insane, and I will explain you why there is such an impact on society with forecasting, and why there is this tech and this human component. Obviously, before to get started, I have to say thank you to a lot of people. For instance, I said thanks, and thanks again to DTU, because obviously most of my career was at DTU, and DTU is responsible for a lot of what I managed to do, and Denmark more generally. But also thank you to a lot of my students and sponsors over the years, right? So thanks to you all also for coming today. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about forecasting. And I want to predict the future of forecasting. I have some personal opinion, I have some ideas of where forecasting is going to go. You may not agree with me, and we can discuss it afterwards if you want. The presentation is going to be mostly non-technical, because we could do a lot of math, and that could be really fun, but I don't think I would get you all on board. And I also want it to be a bit interactive, so don't hesitate to talk at some point if I ask you some question, because I need to hear your opinion. So we're going to discuss how we got here, right? We're going to discuss what you want to forecast, what is forecasting today. I will talk about some easy and tough problems, actually very few. There are so many cool problems within forecasting, I cannot cover them all. And then I will tell you a few things about the future of forecasting, and some of them are pretty much now. Things are moving so fast that many things we consider the future of forecasting is already happening today. Then we'll wrap up. So how did we get here? I don't think many of you have a full overview of the history of forecasting. There's a lot of fun stuff in the history of forecasting, and some of it is not very glorious if you think of it. So that's where it started. We have a few Greek colleagues, I'm sure, in the audience. We have to thank the ancient Greece for starting forecasting. And actually, on purpose, I didn't use the word forecasting here. It's prophecies, right? Which would be an old-fashioned way to say it's an expert-based forecast about the future. So this is a representation of the priestess of Delphi, Pythia. And in these good old days, there was a single person that had the power to tell us what was going to happen, right? And that's how it started. No data, no model, no AI. There's a person that's doing that. So how was this person doing it? Actually, we're not super sure. There's some discussion about fumes and mushrooms and trans and, double guessing. And all the forecasts were ambiguous. So there's some famous story of Croesus and the Persian Empire. Did you ever hear this story? So when Croesus asked the priestess say a very big, important empire is going to fall. And so Croesus thought, I'm going to attack Persia, and Persia is going to fall. But actually, it's his empire that fell. That was also a great empire, right? So that was a specialty from the human-based forecast in the beginning. You have to make them as ambiguous as possible because, it might be interpreted as something that's going to realize. The thing is that the French also contributed to this tendency. Maybe you've heard of Nostradamus. Have you heard of Nostradamus? A very famous example of someone who made prophecies also. They started to call them predictions, but it's because of us in modern days. Nostradamus is part of the popular culture, and we use the term predictions in view of what Nostradamus did, but actually they were also prophecies. Nostradamus never said he was predicting anything, and he mainly wrote these 4-line poems that we call quatrains, and then many people have been over-analyzing what was said, and they say, oh, he predicted the rise of Adolf Hitler. He predicted the Twin Towers were going to fall. He predicted Fukushima. But if you read the poems, you're like, kind of, There's something very important here already. Today, when we do rigorous forecasting, there's a process that we call forecast verification. So we want to assess if the forecasts are right. And we have some measurements, and we compare, etc. Already, when we look at these prophecies, both from Pythia and from Nostradamus, the process of forecast verification is very human and is very biased. We want actually to get some kind of confirmation bias. Oh, yeah, that's what they predicted. And we twisted what we see to make it, as if the forecasts were good, right? And that's a big issue that we have. We'll get back to that at the end of the lecture. The human bias is everywhere in forecasting, and it's very difficult to get away from it. even though we are much more objective these days with more data. Good. So then there's this man, which is one of my idols. Do you recognize him? Oh, there's his name up there. So Robert Fitzroy. Robert Fitzroy was the person that was getting Darwin to his South American expedition, and he was a real scientist that was interested in the weather. And Fitzroy, coming back from his expedition and seeing that there's a problem, we need to be able to tell what the weather is going to be in advance when you go on your ship around the world. And so he pushed for this idea, we should use science. We should stop thinking of omens and prophecies, etc. We should use science to tell something about the future, and especially for the weather, it makes sense, right? The first time this was mentioned at the House of Lords in the UK, people laughed. They're like, you cannot predict the weather 1 or 2 days in advance. And what's the point of science? Science has nothing to do with forecasting. It's about understanding biology, the evolution of species. We don't use science to predict the future. But eventually, he had this approach that is still valid today in most of the forecasting you do. He says it's about science, it's about collecting data, and it's about finding the right way to communicate our statement about the future, right? And that's the foundation of forecasting. So since 1860, the Met Office has issued this 1 and 2 day forecast. I can tell you also there, in the first decades, it was not glorious also, but still there was this scientific approach that come into play. Good, so where did we go next? And that's where we start getting faster. Over the 20th century, we've been starting to collect data. We've been starting to do statistics. We've been starting to have computers. And actually, we completely changed the way we do forecasting. And for you all today, I'm sure, but yeah, Pierre, that's the way we do forecasting. We collect data, we use computers, we have algorithms, we get something out of it, and we publish it in one way or the other, right? It can be on internet, on the news, wherever you look for your forecast. What's very interesting, if you look at the data I have here, there's been a golden age of statistical modeling, you could say. So let's say it's a 30, 40 years period from the 1940s, and most of the models you still see used today in time series analysis, sometimes dynamical system analysis, they come from then. So you think of exponential smoothing that's used everywhere in retail and demand forecasting, these ARMA models from time series analysis, etc., they all came from that time, okay? What was very nice with this golden age, also in the 40s to 70s, is that forecasting was established as a science, let's say, right? So it's pushing completely what Fitzroy was saying. Some people say, okay, when we do forecasting, we're going to be serious, we're going to bring the whole scientific approach, we're going to bring mathematician, we're going to bring statistician, economist, etc. The only minus that we still have today is that forecasting is seen as a very empirical science, or you're just applying stuff. You collect data, you use a model, you're just applying stuff. So it really took, I would say, up to 30 years ago that people really got serious. And so, okay, there are actually scientific problems in forecasting that are quite profound, that requires a lot of thinking, and it's not just using data, applying a model, and getting a forecast out. What's very interesting, and that was mentioned by Mariano also, is that forecasting is fundamentally about bringing value to society or to the stakeholders that use the forecast. We normally don't make statements about the future just for the fun of it, right? So that's very nice when you do forecasting, is that pretty rapidly you can show the value for your stakeholder, for society, from the forecast you've been issuing, right? And I have to say it's quite fulfilling to see that. So that was from the historical perspective. But now we should try to think, what do we want to forecast? What do you want to forecast? Do you want to speak now? I have a microphone I can throw, but maybe you can be loud enough. What would you want to forecast? Yeah?
Stock market.
The stock market. You're not super original. But okay. Yeah, what do you want to forecast?
Crop yield.
Crop yields. Okay, not super original, but at least you try to generate value maybe with this. The stock market, I'm not sure what value will have. What do you want to forecast?
Peace.
Peace. Yes. So the probability of peace, maybe more, right? So this is very important. Tough to forecast, this one, though. Someone else? Is there something else you want to forecast? Shall we? Yeah. Climate change. Impact on climate. Okay. Okay. Yeah?
Imbalance prices.
Imbalance prices in energy markets, again, there's big money at stake. Okay, so you're not super original. Do you know what's the most original thing I've been forecasting? And this was a live experiment. No, you're not gonna get that one. So, 15 years ago, my wife was pregnant, and she starts having contractions, and she told me, when the contractions are gonna be intense of 1 minute, and there's like around 2 minutes apart, that's when we have to go to the hospital, right? So I started collecting data from her contractions, and live, I built models in R to predict when we're going to the hospital, right? You can imagine my wife was not amused, okay? But just to say, since I have this in me, I really love this idea of forecasting. I see everywhere occasions to do some forecasting. I think this was the weirdest thing I've been doing, but there are many other occasions where also, oh, that looks like a cool forecasting challenge. I would like to try that. So who said peace? We had someone at the back who said peace. I have some students this year, for instance, they've been trying to work on developing forecasting model for political violence, right? All these indices for how democratic countries are, can we predict those? How are they going to evolve over the planet? Actually, many countries that have presence all over the globe, they're super interested because they see it as something very geostrategic, how they will account for the different parameters for how they're going to evolve or expand in the future. Okay, so there are many things we want to forecast, and arguably, I think it was in the first version of the pitch for the lecture, you may want to forecast anything and everything, right? Maybe you don't have good reason for it, but in principle, we could forecast everything. So the biggest thing we want to forecast in principle is the weather, right? It has such an impact on everything. So crop yields, energy markets, etc. It's all driven by the weather. I'll show you some numbers after. The economic impact of weather forecasting is insane, right? The political impact of climate forecast is insane also. So these are extremely high-stake forecasting activities. Supply chain, arguably, is close, right? There's so much forecasting in supply chain management that can be related to shipping, that can be related to retail, that can be related to inventory management, etc., etc. I don't have to convince you about COVID and the forecasting that was done. Many of my colleagues that are leading forecasters in the world have been doing some forecasting for governments, for instance, in Australia or the UK. We know that when we have this kind of situation, forecasting can be key. Macroeconomics, we'll discuss it also a bit later. Markets, we heard about stock markets, etc., etc. These are the highest stake forecasting areas that I see, but there's so many others. And if you put that all together, that made me reflect on something we have to do. When we ask for research funding, they say, can you tell us what impact your research will have? And now I should just write that, right? The overall impact of forecasting is seen as more than $1 trillion per year, right? That's kind of what we're talking about, if you put all the forecasting together. If you think of weather forecasting, alone, it's $200 billion per year, the overall impact of weather forecasting. Supply chain forecasting, 150 plus. Energy-related forecasting problem, between 50 and 100 billion a year, right? So these are huge numbers, and you could compare it to the size of the world economy. It's 1 to 2% of the size of the world economy if you think of the impact of forecasting. The thing is, forecasting is everywhere in our life. We don't even realize, but it has an impact everywhere. Whenever people use forecast, make decisions based on forecast, it makes an impact. It's very small. It can be 1% here, 2% there, 10% here, but there is a huge impact. So that's actually why we got this award. When I say we, it's Molsinian that got the award, and it's the work of AFSpace. Molsinian talked with AFSpace, and they said, you know what, we have this problem. We want to pack the cars. You take the ferry to go to Oars? I hope you do. You should. It's really fun. So, you come with your car, and they have to pack the cars. It's a game of Tetris, right? They have to pack the cars, you're on these lanes, and so on. And they said to the people at AFSpace, It would be so good if we could know in advance what cars are coming, you know? How many trucks, how many cars, and so on, because we could make some plans for how we're going to put them in the cargo area, because they are very tight, you know? They have just a few tenths of minutes, up to 20 minutes when they go back and forth, and every minute they're going to be late, they have to speed up, and it has an environmental impact, they're going to use more fuel, the boat may not be well balanced, etc., etc. So that started like this, to say, okay, can you forecast this? But then when you develop this forecasting engine, you can do more, and you can do more, and you can do more. So eventually, the impact for a company like Molsinian is $3 million per year, based on a core forecasting engine. And as I say, you could take a lot of companies like this and see that the impact just add up, right? So David Pissinger wanted to see a video. So I'm going to show you the video of when we won. Not that it's super forecasting focused, but at least it's a nice video. That's a little interlude for the talk.
We stand at a crucial time. A time of significant change and challenges. But the ferry industry, key but often overlooked, is about to change. And Molslinjen, a leader in the Nordic ferry industry and known worldwide for fast-moving ferries, is leading the way. Bridging the waters between Denmark's key regions and extending its reach to Sweden, Molslinjen has evolved from its modest inception in 1963 into a key player. Now, operating under the Nordic Ferry Infrastructure Group, with an impressive fleet of 77 vessels across 65 routes, annually ferrying 22 million people. In a world where ferries carry over 4 billion people every year, similar to the commercial airline industry, Molslinjen is aiming higher. It teamed up with Havspace for a new path, a path that uses operations research, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence to predict demand and set prices dynamically. Results? Faster boarding, more profit, better service for travelers, and most importantly, less environmental harm. We chose this path not because it's easy, but because it's the right thing to do. To be more efficient and make a future that's good for all. This is our legacy in the making.
So next time you take the ferry, think about the fact that Molslinjen now is the most data-driven ferry company in the world. We're hoping some others will follow, but there's lots of other aspects involved, obviously. All right, so now let's change a bit the topic, and we're going to focus on what's happening today. I told you in the 20th century a lot of things happen, and we have to thank a statistician for these golden few decades in the middle of the century. But actually, arguably, the true revolution in forecasting started in the early 2000s, and there are many contributors. Now we are going probabilistic, now we're using AI, now we're actually having so many forecast products, we truly understand the business needs and adapt to it. So I would argue that things have been changing at a very rapid pace over the last 25 years. So what's a forecast for you? If you were to define a forecast, I don't want to hear about the stock market and climate again. How would you define a forecast? What it is for you, a forecast?
Data next time instance.
The data, the next time instant.
The next series of time instance.
Okay.
Like n+1.
Yeah, but what's at n+1?
The time instance.
Sure. That's what you look at. That's called a lead time. Yeah, so what's the forecast?
You discretize your time into intervals.
Yeah.
Of representative.
Yeah.
Let's say a day.
Yeah.
And then you just extrapolate it to the future.
Sure.
So
but
now we are time instance t1.
Yeah.
We go to tn+1. That's it.
Okay. And what do you say at t and t+1? Do you say a single value? Do you say a range? Do you say a probability? Do you say?
No, it's the same like amount of data that you have at time instance tn.
Okay.
Or maybe less.
Okay. I wouldn't define it this way. Yeah.
I understand in a way that some kind of data that seems to be not relevant with each other, that cannot be explained by mathematical principle or physical principle. But actually it has some kind of correlation between each other. So it's like we
So you're not going in the right direction. Thank you so much for your comments, but you're not. Do you have another comment?
Yes, tweaks usually a distribution.
So you want a distribution. So you look at a random variable. So the future is random. You define some random variable and you don't to describe it with a distribution. Would some other people want to do something else? That looks complicated. Yeah?
Forecast for me is information about the future that can help me take decision now.
Ah.
Like that I can minimize the risk.
Okay, so you all say some interesting stuff, right? So sorry, I was pushing two people. It was to try to change a bit the topic, and that was good because so here I heard a few things. So distribution. So we hear about probability. We're never sure about the future, right? So we have to accept we talk in probabilities, or there has to be some kind of random variables there, right? That we're trying to characterize. Then you talk about statistics. We have lots of data. We want to extract patterns. Then we obviously project ourselves at the next step. But Raja was saying something important. We link it to a decision process, right? Forecasting, there's a reason for it, is because someone wants to make decision and you want to have the optimal information to make that decision. And so normally as a forecaster, there's this guy Chatfield who actually wrote some essays, you could say, because it was quite philosophical the way he was thinking of time series analysis and forecasting. He was saying, as a statistician, I'm a consultant and I also spend a lot of time with my forecast users to understand why do we need the forecast? How are they going to make the decision? Because if someone tells me, I'm going to make a decision this way, I say, okay, you want to know the probability of a certain thing happening. If they say they want to make some other type of decision, I say, okay, you want to have an interval with a certain probability for the range of a certain outcome. If they say, I don't know, they want to trade, you want just to have a direction. Is the market going up and down? So depending on how you talk with the forecast user, you actually realize that forecast can be so many things. And that's what we call a forecast product. You have this interface between the forecaster and the forecast user, and it's designed in a way that is the optimal way to convey the information to support decision making, right? So yes, a forecast is about a statement about the future, but it's not just trying to be right, it's trying to be valuable for the decision making that's linked to the forecast. Good. I didn't mention AI. Yeah, I did mention AI. Damn, I was supposed not to mention AI till now. I said a lot of things have changed in the last 25 years, and one of the things that has pushed us is really AI. If you teach time series analysis, or if you attended time series analysis modules here at DTU or some other place, we're really trying to think about all the intricate dependencies in the data, the information, etc. We try to be very subtle in terms of the modeling tools. If you talk to many of the modelers today within the AI space, they see everything as a very large regression problem, right? So we want to do supervised learning. We have a bunch of examples. We want to learn from them. We have a bunch of input features. That's all the input we may have when we want to do forecasting. We have the labels, so that's the kind of output that we want to predict. And we have a lot of them from the past. We learn the dependencies between the two, so that's a large regression problem. And then we use that for forecasting. Right? Some argue it's not elegant, it's not very good, this is not what we teach in time series analysis and the likes, but actually it's used a lot, and it works quite well overall, right? And it does the job. So most of the practical forecasting setup you see today, people have a lot of examples, they do supervised learning, they use some of these AI tools, and that's it, right? So that's the typical pipeline you would have. You collect a lot of data. You do your feature engineering, so it's not because you collect data as raw material that is directly usable. You have to see data as some raw diamond, right? And then you have to, cut it, polish it in different ways to make it valuable as input to your pipeline. Then you have your complex nonlinear regression engine. So use your favorite AI tool. XGBoost is very popular. Neural networks are very popular, but just use whatever you prefer. And then we get this forecast out that we put in a format that fits the use in decision making. I'm not oversimplifying. If you go to businesses today, this is mostly the kind of pipeline you will see for how they go from data to issuing a forecast. We can do better than that, but still, it's a bit suboptimal and it's quite easy to implement. The thing is that AI is also fundamentally I don't want to undermine AI, that's why I'm transitioning to this slide. AI is fundamentally changing the way we do forecasting, and again, our weather friends are the first one to get there. Do you know about this revolution in weather forecasting with AI? Do you? A few people. Okay, so let me go back to Fitzroy. Fitzroy said, we have to use science to do forecasting, right? To do weather forecasting. And I worked at ECMWF in the UK, so that's the European Centre for Medium-Range Weather Forecasting, arguably the best weather forecasting center in the world. And all of my colleagues were telling me, Pierre, we need science, we need the physics, we need a model, and then we solve equation and we do forecasting, okay? Today, you can do better than that without any science. You can have an AI that can predict the weather better than any physics-based model, right? Just by using data and an AI. If you think of it philosophically, it's really disturbing, because why do we need science in the first place if now an AI can just use data, never learn the physics, and still do something that is better in terms of forecasting than the models that would know the physics, right? And it happened very fast. Again, I wanted you to understand the pace of change. Weather forecasting started in the 1850s. Arguably, Lewis Fry Richardson brought this idea that we can really use math physics computers in practice, right? So that was 70 years after. ECMWF was established 50 years again after as the leading center to do, the quantitative weather forecasting we're used to today, with big computers, very interesting models. And just in the last 3 years, DeepMind released an AI-based model that reached state-of-the-art. ECMWF developed their own, which is also state-of-the-art with very simple ideas. And the Chinese guys from Fuxi Weather, based at Fudan, just outside of Shanghai, they managed to push the state-of-the-art to a level where you don't even need any kind of physics to do AI-based weather forecasting and still beat the state-of-the-art, all right? So that tells us that actually AI is not just a tool we can use for forecasting, it's also something that's going to challenge the way we think of forecasting itself. And we'll get to that at the very end of the lecture. Good. So today when we do forecasting, I told you we have to define some forecasting product. That's the interface between the forecaster and the forecast user. I've been working on a lot of these different forecast products. For those who know me, I'm sure you've seen quite a few. We've been doing some probabilistic forecasting. So we're trying to have some envelopes informing about different ranges for what could happen in the future. Many people have been working on that, and not just me and a few. You can also try to do forecasting. So these are the lead times on the x-axis, and this is whatever variable you may think of. Here it's energy from wind farms, but it could be something else. So you could have alternative scenarios for the future. You could also have a single trajectory. Oops. Okay, it's a bit complicated with these 3 screens. So you could have a single trajectory in the future, and so on and so on. When I was preparing my slides, I was like, I could have 12 slides just showing you different kind of forecast product for how we could communicate the information and tailor it to different needs. So the thing is that GenAI is a tool you can use to actually very quickly define some kind of forecast product and deliver forecast in a format that's exactly what your user wants, right? Which is also a big change compared to before. I would spend a lot of time talking to a forecast user, trying to understand what they need. I need to hard code that and try to see how I get my forecast into this right format. Today with GenAI, it's instantaneous, right? You just have your back end that does all the crunching of the number, and then you use an LLM to just get the forecast in the format that they want. I caricature a bit, but that's an important point. Then I told you forecasting is about data. We need data as input. It's about connecting to a decision-making problem. I didn't talk too much about the human component, right? And we're going to talk more and more about the human component as we go further. So this is a probabilistic forecast. With this kind of envelope, we provide an information about the future when we make statements about different level of probabilities for the different envelopes. So here you have a central envelope, that's the darkest one. The statement is like, 10% chance is going to be within this envelope. And the broadest, the widest interval here, it's a 90% envelope, okay? Whenever I've been working on this kind of forecast and interacting with users, there's always a component about what they really understand and what they're ready to use. So see, for instance, here you have many different envelopes with different level of probability. Let's say from a mathematical point of view, or if I do verification, they're all valid. Still, if you ask people, they would have different kind of feelings about it, right? So do I prefer to see wider interval, but you give me a higher guarantee? So it's very wide, but it's 90% chance it covers what's going to happen. Or you give me a tighter interval, but now it's 50-50, right? So you have to think somehow about the risk aversion of your forecast user, about their decision-making problem. But in many different application areas, we can see actually it's very difficult for people to assess what they want and what they can live with. So I have some students who've done some survey-based work to try to understand that from people. I have some colleagues also who are doing that, and it's always a bit tricky to actually figure it out. There's another element, which is the institutional / societal / cultural component. Do you know this person? Do you recognize him? No one's British in the room? No? No British? I don't have a British friend in the room. Oh, too bad. So this is Andrew Bailey. Andrew Bailey is the governor of the Bank of England. He's also one of my idols. If you think of it, he is one of the toughest jobs on the planet right now when you think about the economy. You know the role of a national bank, right? It's to provide some information and possibly to decide on the interest rate. So in the UK, we had the last decision, for instance, a few days ago. They didn't increase, but they didn't lower also the interest rate, and it impacted the whole economy, right? So what happened at the Bank of England? This is a true forecast. They publish several times a year the forecast, and you have this monetary policy report that is published in November. This is their forecast for inflation in the coming 3 years that is issued mid-21, okay? So these are probabilistic forecasts. I told you, you know, there are different intervals with different probability. Here, the central interval is 30% chance is going to be in there. The next interval is 60% chance. The latest interval, the widest, is 90% chance, right? Do you see the scale on the right? It's like, I don't know, from -4, to +8. Do you know what inflation reached in the UK at this period? 12. Hey, you know what? I'm very upset because I think people overreacted. If I said that 90% chance is going to be with this interval, there's still a 10% chance it's going to be out, right? 5% above, 5% below. This was an extreme event. How can we assume it should be within the interval, all right? But still, it triggered a lot of thinking. And actually, because of this, they hired, let's say, Ben Bernanke, who is a Nobel Prize winner in economics, and they asked him to come to the UK to review the practice of the Bank of England, right? And one of the things that this person said is you have to get rid of this. This is such a bad way to communicate forecast uncertainty. Why? So the first reason why is like, oh, because in the US we don't do it that way, and you should do the same. I caricature a bit, but if you read between the lines, that's what he said. And the other is this classical debate about these two plots you see here on the right. You have this plot here that gives this envelope of uncertainty, and by the way, it's the trademark of the Bank of England. I'm not the first person who used this kind of fine chart. They were, right? So in a way, I copied them or inspired them. I was inspired by them, but this is a representation that they were using from the start for their probabilistic forecast, or since 96, sorry, not from the start. And this is what Bernanke said we should use. Because Bernanke said, if you look at alternative scenarios for the future, you can relate much more. These are alternative stories for the future, right? And you feel you could play with a little cursor, and this would change the scenario, and that helps a lot decision makers. While his view was that this is not helpful. This gives you an envelope of uncertainty, but what does that mean? I don't think we take questions in. Do you have a question? Go for it. But that's exactly the point of these slides. It's a cultural element, right? So it's not about the math, because the math is the same to generate these guys behind, right? I'm going to describe the random variables, but there's a very strong cultural element and institutional element in terms of how we want to communicate the forecast and the uncertainty. Okay, we need to move on. So easy problem and hard problems. An easy problem, I told you with this AI kind of movement in the past years, I don't want to be controversial, but forecasting is super easy. You have a lot of work in practice, sure, to program stuff, to have a pipeline, etc. But in reality, if you have big brains, people who know how to do it, it has become so easy to do forecasting. I never said it was a good forecast. You can forecast something, right? You get data in, you have an AI, you can make a forecast. And I told you, you can use an LLM even to make the forecast look the way you want. So it has gotten extremely easy to forecast, sorry to say, for all my forecasting friends. I have some students who are able to build some forecasting platform completely open source using open data and reaching state of the art in terms of forecast quality. It's just so that you understand that I'm not saying don't buy forecasts from vendors, but I'm just saying, you know, it is getting easier and easier. The thing is that if we go into the tougher problems, we still don't know how to link forecast quality, so how good we are at telling what's going to happen in the future, and forecast value, how we make sure there's increased benefits from using the forecast in decision making. For some classes of problem, we can connect the two, but in the general case, we cannot. And I have many friends that are more on the math side. They're trying, you know, to crack that problem, but it seems nearly impossible for all kinds of problems on Earth to say, okay, I can promise you if your forecast is better in terms of quality, it's going to bring you higher value. It's really a case-by-case basis, and it's annoying. The other thing is that we've realized with AI, we always need more and more data, right? I want more data all the time, and in many cases, I have a lot of data, right? But we want more and more data, and typically people don't want to share data, right? It's a really annoying thing. So there are different countries that have different views, there are different researchers that are proposing different ideas, but we need to find ways to incentivize data sharing. Should we force people to share their data? I don't think it's going to go too well. Some countries are doing that. Should we incentivize and reward people for sharing data? Maybe. So it's up to you and different societies. So we've been looking at different ideas for this. I don't want to go into detail. There's Daron Acemoglu, who got a Nobel Prize in economics last year, has also worked on data markets, for instance, that is here in the middle. So many people around the planet have been looking at different ideas. Google, DeepMind have been pushing for federated learning. So we're going to try somehow to split our learning problems and forecasting problems so that we collaborate without sharing data. People like Daron Acemoglu and others have said, you know, if data is a commodity, we can make markets for data. But then it's super difficult to price data, and there's so many intricacies of data that makes it difficult to just have markets for data. And what we've been proposing or trying to develop is markets for analytics. So if you define some specific analytics tasks like forecasting, we can actually define some kind of reward function and ways to have a market platform so that if we contribute to help each other and improve forecast, then we can share some money, right? I'll give you an example later on. Good. A quick game. I don't have so much time. So really for the human side of forecasting, let's say now you're also at the Dansk National Bank. How is it called? Dansk National Bank. Yeah, okay. So you have a high-stake job. You have to predict inflation. That's the data that you have, right? So we're in March 26. This is what the data look like. This is not real data, by the way. We know the target is 2%, right? This is what we see. What do you feel about it? What do you feel about it? These are two different forecasts I produced with two different models. Option A, option B. Which one do you want? Which one do you pick? Your boss is saying, we need a forecast. We need to communicate to Mette Frederiksen before she leaves office. We need to tell her the forecast. Who picks A? Who picks A? Who picks B? Oh, that's not a clear cut. Okay? So we have an issue here, because most people will pick B. You know why? There's two things here that are human. One, I was given a target, so I have wishful thinking. I want to go to 2%, right? And the second thing is what we call representativeness. We want the forecast to look as it should, right? So the second one, B, it looks as it should. Inflation has to go down, it's a bit bumpy and so on. What's this other forecast that's almost a flat line? It doesn't make any sense. I generated the data. It's a simple autoregressive process. I have the true model. The A is the best forecast you could issue if you want to minimize a quadratic loss, right? So in many ways, the best forecast is option A, but I can tell you in the real world, if you ask people to choose the forecast they're going to communicate, they're going to feel B is a nicer forecast to share with the broad audience than A, even though we cannot show it's a better one. And this is actually what happened. If I was to continue generating the data, it's even worse than what you may think, and maybe that's what's happening to us in a few months. Inflation is going up again. Cool. I want to touch 3 very quick things just to close for the future of forecasting. I told you it's never been that easy to forecast. Things have changed very fast, and we can use AI and develop things very easily and nearly for free. I have a student who is developing a forecast anything platform. You have an LLM interface, you go there, you say, oh, I want to forecast this, I want it to be this way, I have this kind of data. Actually, the data is not clean, can you clean it by the way, on the way, etc. And then it just gives you, you say the forecast has to look this way, I want to use it for this decision process. The platform automatically find the best model, tune the model, make the forecast for you exactly the way you want, right? It's a master's student at Imperial College spending 3 months on it, right? And this platform can be used to forecast anything you want, anything. I'm not saying it's always going to be valuable, but in principle, we could start with this, and I can have a platform that can predict anything you want, any way you want, okay? So that's one thing. So forecasting is getting highly democratized. The other thing is prediction markets. I told you with data markets, analytics markets, we have markets for forecasting. So we could have market platform out there. They exist already on prediction markets, but they're more gambling platforms. If you want to predict real estate prices in Copenhagen, we could go out there, put the task on a platform, telling people, I'm ready to pay for forecasting. You know, you value how much you're ready to pay for some forecast quality. And you can have a lot of people, like students here, could just crunch the numbers, issue some forecasts, and make some money. One of my PhD students is doing that. He participates in a prediction market, and he complements his PhD scholarship with money because he's paid just bidding with some forecast in some prediction market. And the last thing is no more forecasting. I know I have some colleagues here. I'm sure George would be in this direction. We go from predictive analytics to what they call prescriptive analytics. Since we're so good with data, with AI, with optimization, etc., some people say, very famous professors at MIT, for instance, they say, we don't need forecast anymore. I can go directly from data to decision. Why do we need to forecast? So that's what we call prescriptive analytics in the more general way, is how we go directly from the bunch of data, the input features, to decisions. Do you think forecasting is going to disappear? Who would bet that forecasting is going to disappear in the room? 2 people, 3. We're not going to be friends. You also think it's going to disappear? 4. I don't agree with you. You know why? Just human nature. We cannot accept. We're so curious as animals. We cannot accept. We don't know what's going to happen next. Even if you have a machine that tells you what's the optimal decision to make, you're going to want to know why, and why is because you're going to see a forecast. And even if you're not in this framework, you just want to know. I'm sorry to tell you, we are so curious as I say animals, sorry, we're animals. Huh? As human beings, we're so curious. I'm very happy with this line of research, but please do not think we're going to jump over forecasting and just do prescriptive analytics. I want to conclude. So the first thing I want to do, because I think it's very fun when you reflect on the history of forecasting, we started with this one expert, that is Pythia or Nostradamus, and with a small number of people who want to go see them and get their prophecies, right? Then we moved on in the 20th century to an approach that's more scientific. We have statisticians that develop models. We're having businesses to do forecasting, right? And we have a forecasting economy today. We say it has a huge impact, okay? But in the future, with this kind of forecast anything platform, this market for forecasting, the fact that it's gotten easier, I'm sorry to say, but there's a scenario that makes we will all become forecasters and we all become forecast users, right? So some people call it the democratization of forecasting, call it whatever you want, but I think forecasting has a bright future and we'll see a much more democratic view of what forecasting may be. Then 3 statements to close. I hope I convince you that forecasting is a science and an art, especially if you were at the Bank of England. I can tell you they feel it. There's a combination of these aspects. But it's also about tech and the human. I'm at this Dyson school at Imperial College, for instance. That's the motto of the school, and that's the reason why they wanted me to be there. Forecasting is really a problem where there's so many technical, scientific challenges, but we have to think of the human component, right? And it comes together. I was insisting a few times, the pace of change is unprecedented. Think of data science in general, but especially forecasting. What is happening today is actually scary. I promise you, in the coming few years, things are going to change so much, not just because of AI, because of business models and because of many other things. And the last point, because I often, or my wife laughs at me maybe regularly, when she tells what I'm doing as a researcher, so, oh, he does forecasting, and people laugh. But forecasting is so important. We all underestimate how important forecasting is in our life. So I hope I convinced you, right, that forecasting is super important. Remember the trillion number. And also, please look around you, and you will see that there are forecasts everywhere, and that you need forecast all the time. So thanks very much. And if you have questions, I'm happy to take them. And it's a very good timing, right? I managed to do it in 45 minutes.
Yeah, fantastic. So Pierre, thank you so much for a very inspiring, fantastic talk. As Pierre mentioned, I was afraid that Pierre would kill us with a lot of equations, so this is why I was saying, I'll show a video when we are about to fall asleep.
I have more videos if you want.
So it was really good. So on behalf of the Ørsted board and DTU, I would like to thank you very much for this inspiring talk, and Thomas has bought a fantastic
gift for you.
You don't need to open it
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll open it after.
Yeah, let's give him a hand. And now, are there any questions? I already saw one over there. We have a number of microphones.
I think, yeah, it's because they're recording.
Plug it to the top. Okay, so I see the different types of forecasting. Some are based, the two types we talk most about would be financial forecasting and weather and climate forecasting.
Yeah.
And in some sense they're fundamentally different, because we know that there's a set of equations governing one. They're hard to solve for climate and so on. And in forecasting, say, the coming of Napoleon or the stock market is probably a completely different thing. So when you just abstractly say, put in data and put out a forecast, I'm just wondering your reflections on if the information in the data is enough.
Yeah.
And let me just qualify just a little more, sorry. When you show the progress in weather prediction, going to AI, and you say now we drop the physical equations, I'm not sure about that. Because what you're doing is you're putting it into the black box, which is the machine learning. And learning the tendencies of a field, if you have enough data, is maybe not that hard.
Yeah.
So,
so let me comment on. So first, thank you so much. It's a very good question. There's obviously, in 1 hour, we cannot cover all of this. There's obviously different categories of problems. There are problems that are driven by physics, and we expect our friends to have told us about equations for, anything, for instance, involved in the weather. It can be other things. And then there's some other processes where we don't have physical equation, and you may have you feel the best I can do is rely on data, right? So first, you're really right. Then to answer your point about the weather, so firstly, all the results are published, right? So if you want to see the results about how good they do with purely data-driven approach compared to physics-inspired or physics-based approach, you can see the results. Where you're correct with what you say is that it must be the case, one, that we could do even better if we can get this AI to learn about the physics or to use the physics. So they call it physics-informed or physics-constrained learning for this machine. And ECMWF that I mentioned, for instance, that's where they're going now to do even better. And the other thing, could we not get the AI actually to find again somehow the law of physics within this data, and there would be an interface with the human so that we help the AI also better understand the physics and go further. So where I think what you say, please believe me, purely data-driven, you can already beat physics-based models, but we could do even better, right, if we get these models to know about the physics. Okay, does that satisfy you? Okay, cool. The question there. Thomas, throw. Ah, you have another one. Careful. I'm not sure it works though. Guys, there's a second microphone, it doesn't work. No, it doesn't work. Throw the other one. Let's go. Oh, you have the other microphone. Nothing works. They don't want you to talk.
Okay. 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 But I have to talk because I'm very happy.
Why did they cut it?
Okay, I'm very happy to see you again because I'm the alumni of DTU students that has been in your course for several years ago. You must remember me. And I think you have opened the door to the data science or this kind of forecasting for me because I was just a traditional energy engineer. So now I'm curious about because you have introduced lots of your project, it covered lots of decision making, like any area, engineering, business, or government, any area that has decision making that is related to, then you cover. But I'm curious about what's your main interest or what's your biggest project that you're doing right now?
To be frank, the reason why I mentioned this, so it's not because of what's happening right now, but I believe all this macroeconomic forecasting is really a pain point today, right? Because that's the frontier where you see colleagues working at these national banks. They say they can do so much more with AI, but the bottleneck, the pain point is this: how do we find the right way to communicate the forecast uncertainty and to get the decision makers to make the right decision based on the information we give them, right? So as much as I love the tech stuff and the AI and so on, I think the next frontier is really how we reconcile these two. And as I said, the macroeconomic front right now might be that. When it comes to using AI at scale to do amazing forecasting, the weather people that we just mentioned, I think they're doing a great job. But this is really the pain point, the next frontier. So I've not been involved in this discussion. I said as a joke to some people, I don't understand why they called Bernanke and not me to discuss this. Yeah, my ego was bruised. No, I'm joking, obviously. But I think this is really an interesting frontier.
Yes, but can you say that you are more focused on this macro perspective instead of specific projects?
No, so I'm not, it's not the macro perspective, it's really this idea of how we make sure that we produce the best forecast, but this is really the best forecast for whoever is going to use it, right? And for instance, one thing that I find here is a big mistake, and I don't understand why they were obsessed with this. Why the forecast as a single format? They believe we have to agree on a format, and that's how we're going to communicate to everybody. But why, as I say, if I have an LLM today, I could make it an interactive platform, and whatever is behind is the same about the tech, the data, etc. But people can choose the right format for themselves through interaction, right? So that's why I say I think it's really this frontier where we want to understand the interface between the tech and the human, right? Next question. We don't have so much time. But thank you for the question.
Hi, Pierre.
Yeah?
When a central entity forecasts something like inflation or prices or traffic, for example, then the forecast itself affects the realization of the very thing you are predicting.
Yeah.
So is it still a forecast or is it more of a decision in disguise?
Yeah. So I didn't want to go down that lane originally. So some people call this self-negating forecast, right? Or if you go also to people who do logistic inventory and so on, they say, okay, but are these targets or are these forecasts, right? So you're totally right. And this is another thing that's super important. I couldn't put it in the slides, but there are articles all over these days about the fact the forecasting community is doing it completely wrong. It's all about correlation, no causation, right? And if we can have a proper causal model, then we actually can understand, depending on how the forecasts are going to be used and decisions are going to be made, then it self-corrects the forecast right away. So I know that some colleagues who work on causal inference are actually trying to go in this direction. And it's also rethinking what I was just saying. Is a forecast is not a single thing. It's actually an underlying causal model. And you can have any kind of scenario you want in terms of how people would act on the forecast, and the forecast would self-correct, right? And I think it's quite beautiful, actually, this idea that the forecast would not be a single static thing, but something that lives depending on how you're going to use it, right? So a very good question. Yep. Yeah, there were a few.
Working? Okay, thank you so much. I want to ask, what's your stance on the accountability problem? Let's say you are the governor of the Bank of England, you're using your let's say, super new, sophisticated AI model, which is the best you've ever seen, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then maybe we are very unlucky and we are in the 0.1, let's say, distributional, and the probability of something very bad.
Yeah.
And how accountable are you as a governor? Because those models are not explainable most of the time.
Sure. So be very careful here. You're mixing up two roles. There's a forecaster and there's a governor. So the governor doesn't forecast in principle, right? Is the one that is above the whole process. So I say that because it's super important. There's an old tradition by law, and maybe some say it's an old French law originally. A forecaster is not accountable. A forecaster is doing their best to say what's going to happen, but you cannot blame them for the fact it doesn't happen the way they said, right? This is true. This is the case. So I don't know if it's a French law, but there is this understanding legally, internationally, that a forecaster, unless you can report misbehavior or someone was malicious, etc., but if, to the best of their knowledge, they have done their job, they are not accountable. So think of a big flood, for instance. If you've done your best to predict a flood and people die, I mean, you're not going to go to the forecaster and say it's your fault, right? And there's been a few cases over the last few years, by the way, for different kind of disasters where people turn towards forecaster, and there was an understanding you cannot be penally responsible for a forecast if it's done to your best. Now the governor is someone else. The governor is a decision maker, so is the client, is the forecast user. And that's why I say, I mean, I have a lot of respect for this person, and I wouldn't want to be in his shoes, because the decision he's going to make based on the forecast is accountable, right? And I can tell you, in the UK, so many people are attacking him, and I think he's doing a great job, actually, because he's doing his best, and based on the information he has, I think he makes very sensible decisions. I think most people would not do better than that, right? So, but we have to be a bit careful. Whoever uses a forecast to make a decision can be accountable, because they are the decision maker, and that's their job. The forecaster is doing their best to give the information. If there's no malicious intent, again, they are not legally accountable.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Thanks for the very nice presentation. I think these days the large language model might be the biggest, topic. Maybe I can ask something about that. I just see you also use Gemini generate lots of slides.
It's one of the first time I do that. Actually, it worked very well. I was very happy.
Yeah, but do you have some suggestions of us how, what should we do to do something meaningful as a researcher in this, large language model trend? And also, did you forecast that 10 years ago something will come as a large language model and will change our life?
Okay, so there are many interesting questions and points here. So first, here, for instance, so we turn it into a lecture as if you're really students in the classroom. I mean, I think the LLMs for all the side stuff, like as I say, for this forecasting platform, the LLM is there as a wrapper, as an interface with the human, or for defining the products at the end. Here also the LLM is to produce plots, but it's me who decide what the plots are supposed to be about, right? So for me, the LLM has to be there to augment your brain, not to replace your brain, right? And I think that's the most important. So whenever we use these tools in research, you always need to think of it to augment your capability, not to replace you, otherwise it's going to go wrong, right? So that's for this. After, what was the other part of your question?
10 years ago.
Oh, 10 years ago. Obviously, I didn't see it coming. So that's part of the legally responsible. There's so many disruptions in our lives, right? We cannot predict everything. All forecasts are wrong, right? And especially when you have this kind of disruption. Just to be fair, many tech experts, they knew something could happen, right? So you think more in terms of probability. But many people have looked at what was happening in this space, and they said, you know, if this picks up, this is going to be big, right? So there's this kind of statement, if then, right? But to forecast it deterministically, I mean, I don't see anyone who would dare seriously to say that. Otherwise, some people say they are full of, you know. Yeah.
So we are slowly running out of time. So the last question.
Sidste spørgsmål.
I don't think it works. Okay.
Yeah, prøv bare igen.
Yeah, on your last slide, actually, you said that you can go directly to descriptive without passing by prescriptive forecasting.
Prescriptive analytics. So we jump over the forecast. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you don't forecast anything. Is that not forecasting, or is that the machine just does it itself?
Okay, that's really good. So there's been also a lot of debates. So many extremely good professors in operations research are actually debating about this. And that's why I told you what is a forecast, because there we have to be a bit careful. A forecast is a statement about a process we're interested in, right? But here you're saying you want to predict your decision. A decision is an action of a human or whatever decision maker. It's not a process where you try to say what's going to happen with it. So normally what we've been trying to do is always to separate this, and I think, you know, management science and operation research have been quite good at that, as to say, you know, I have my set of parameters and I have my decision variables and so on. So predicting the best decision, it's a weird statement. And what prescriptive analytics is doing, if you say they predict, it's you predict a decision. But a decision is your choice. It's not something to predict. Normally what you want to predict is some kind of free process. It's nature, it's, I don't know. So I'm very uncomfortable with this idea that we would call it predicting decisions or best decisions, right?
I mean, there is another thing for me, is that you can't predict the future, so
yes, we can.
By nature, basically you need to have a risk aversion directly into that.
Yeah.
So if a machine takes that one, it takes you the ability to actually be accountable for that decision.
Yeah.
And if something goes wrong, how do you know? I mean, how can you go back and figure out what went wrong?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in operation research, for example, you count that with like stochastic optimization or whatever it is.
Sure.
So you do a forecasting, and after you simulate what kind of decision can be taken, and after you're there, like, okay, which one do I pick?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's obviously an open debate, and I don't have a final answer now. I just wanted to raise it because this is a scenario for the future, that we stop doing forecasting. My view is that we will always have forecasts, so scenarios, as you mentioned, for scenario-based stochastic optimization are very important. And then there's this point that you mentioned, transparency and auditability. I think having a forecast permits to open the box and say, okay, now I understand why we made this decision this way. Well, even if some people do some explainability research for prescriptive analytics, it's not the same. Again, there's a real human at some point, and if you tell them, oh, I have some sharp explanation for your prescriptive analytics or something like this, they'll say, but that's not what I'm asking for. I want to understand why have we made this decision. So that's why, in my opinion, forecasting will always be there. And as I told you, anyway, we are so curious that we will not accept that this disappears. Otherwise, I'm out of a job.
Cool. So this will be the last words.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And there's a mini reception outdoors where you can mingle and you can ask Pierre many more questions. So thank you so much for coming.